Hello again, Facebook friends and followers. I hope all of you are doing well today. The reason for this video today is I want to talk to you about a very important, very crucial topic. And the topic I want to talk to you about is the topic of race. The concept of race. Let's talk about race for a while today. I want you to sit back and enjoy this conversation and pay close attention to the things that I'm going to cover today because they're very crucial. I'm going to start out by bursting the bubbles of most of you, quite possibly, and I'm going to make a very provocative statement by telling you that there is no such thing as race. It does not exist, and it ought to be thrown in the trash bin as far as I'm concerned. Race does not exist, and race should not be used by any child of God. The concept of race in and of itself is in fact a satanic concept. And it should be thrown in the trash bin of ignorance. For that is truly where it belongs, in the trash bin. So let's look at this concept of race and let's see from a human perspective where it actually came from. In the 1800s, there was a man by the name of Charles Darwin, who ironically came from a very religious family. But he strayed off into some other satanic activity which led him to start delving into what was called evolution. In 1859, he published a book with a pretty long title. It's called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggles for Life. Evolutionary theory is, by its very nature, is a racist philosophy, for it teaches that different groups of races of people evolved at different times and at different rates of evolution. Based on this theory, man evolved over a period of millions of years. Well before the scriptures say man was created. And man supposedly evolved from ape-like creatures. Now the reason why this is so significant is because it directly contradicts the creation story in the Holy Scriptures. The Holy Scriptures tell us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And on the sixth day of creation specifically, God created man. He took the time and he actually formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into man the breath of life. This is all, according to the Holy Scriptures, this all happened approximately a little over 6,000 years ago. That God formed man. He created man directly. And he created all things within 6 days. And on the seventh day, God rested from his works. But the theory of evolution goes back for millions of years. You understand what I'm saying? Millions of years. According to the theory of evolution, mankind evolved. Now, what he evolved from, I have no idea, because there had to be nothing to begin with. But somehow man evolved, and he evolved from some ape-like creatures that had themselves evolved and were crawling around upon the earth millions of years ago. Some of the names that were given to some of these ape-like creatures include Australopithecus afarensis, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and then finally, after all these years of evolution, finally, Homo sapiens, which is supposed to be the evolved modern man. The reason this is satanic in its original nature is because Satan, who is the opposer of God, who hates God, who resists God, who hates God's creation, man, wants to directly disprove and directly contradict the creation story where man is concerned. And to make man appear as if instead of he was created in the image of God, wants to make man appear as if he was some kind of slime that slimed up on some shore millions of years ago, began to evolve into this ape-like creature that went around in a similar fashion as the modern apes, the modern gorillas. And over a period of millions of years, evolved, began to decide that some of them would go off in different spheres of evolution and would swing through trees, and some would begin to walk, and, through these different lines of evolution, different races, following me? Different races of man would develop, and depending on the line of evolution that they happen to evolve into, some would be inferior, follow me? Some would be superior, and some would be kind of so-so, according to the theory of evolution and the idea of natural selection and the survival of the fittest, which is also tied into this theory of evolution, because if you follow the theory of natural selection, what happens is that through this process of evolution, the fittest of the species would evolve above the inferior races, and this superior line of evolution would quite naturally be the one that should take over and the one that should have rulership and authority over the other lines of evolution, because after all, this superior line of evolution is the fittest. I'm struggling not to laugh at this point because this is so foolish and so ridiculous and so patently absurd. I'm struggling to keep a straight face while I'm talking to you about this. Let me show you, due to this foolish evolutionary theory, let me show you some of the foolishness that came about. Now, over the years, after Charles Darwin had published his book and after following people that had followed him, had followed this foolishness for many years, they, of course, came up with their own theories, and they enlarged upon his evolutionary theory, and they continued to teach this absurdity, this absurd foolishness. The Australian Aborigines, as they're called, those of you who are familiar with the Aborigines of Australia and have followed presentations or have read literature on them like I have over the years, you will know that the Aborigines have an appearance that is distinct and somewhat different from the typical appearance, say, of a Western man or a Western woman. Some would go so far as to say some of them have an ape-like appearance in their facial features and what have you. And so because of this, they were long considered to be the so-called missing links. Okay? Missing links between the old ape-like creatures, some of whom I named to you a while ago, that evolved into the humans. So they were considered to be that link, the missing link, by some people for many years. These Australian Aborigines. Also included in those groups were some of the Polynesians, Bushmen, people that are called the Hottentots, and some Negro tribes, Negroid tribes as they called them, are supposed to be at the lowest stages of human development. In other words, according to evolutionary theory, many of the Negroid tribes and the Australian Aborigines are still on the lower levels of evolution. They haven't quite reached full human development yet. They're not fully human yet, so they're still evolving. All right? On the lower levels of evolution. This foolishness, this evolutionary racist foolishness was so pronounced at one point in history that pygmies, African pygmies, those of you familiar with pygmies will know that they're very short stature. They're very short-statured people. And they live on the continent of Africa. They had actually taken some pygmies from over in Africa. They'd gone to Africa and brought some pygmies, and they were actually displaying some of these pygmies, some of these human beings, these pygmies, with orangutans in a cage at the Bronx Zoo. This actually happened. They were actually doing this, displaying them as if they were relatives to the apes in a zoo. This is how foolish this theory is, and how far they had taken this. For those who have bought into this evolutionary theory and this idea of races, which were brought about by this evolutionary theory, that's where the concept of races comes from. For those of you who don't know and haven't caught on yet, that's where it came from. That's where it was derived from. This theory of evolution. Unfortunately, most of the world, most of the known world today have bought into this foolishness, this theory of evolution, this theory of races. Most of the world believe in races today. You were to go to grab a random person from Asia or from Africa or from Europe or whatever continent you would want to go to, most of the people on the face of the earth believe in the concept of races. This is just terrible. This is very unfortunate. But this is how successful the devil has been. This is how successful Darwin has been with his foolishness, with this satanic doctrine of racism, this satanic doctrine of evolution, and the doctrine of races that has grown up because of it, has populated itself throughout the world. Because of this, it has resulted in ingrained prejudices against certain groups of people. Because after all, if these certain groups of people are inferior and they're lower down on the ladder of evolution, it's justifiable to think of them as lesser people, not people at all. As a matter of fact, do you understand that when black people were first brought to the United States in the slave trade, that the slave masters did not even consider the blacks to be fully human yet? They weren't fully human. They were less than human. They even assigned percentages to those people, those black people, as to how far along the evolutionary ladder they were. But they weren't considered to be fully human yet. Which is kind of ironic in and of itself, because if you're going to say that the blacks were not fully human, that they were animals, that they weren't fully human yet, and yet you're going to rape the black women and reproduce with them and lie with them by force, these subhuman people, then according to your own theory and according to your own claims, you're committing bestiality. You said they were beasts after all. They're not human. So since they're not human and since you're supposed to be above that, why would you lie with an animal? After all, they're not human. So that's a big problem for you. I mean, those of you that held that, I mean, they're not alive anymore, those people. They're gone. But for those people that held that view, they were actually creating bestiality because the ones that they were forcibly raping, they were not human. You follow the foolishness? You follow the inane thought process of all this? How foolish it was, and how foolish it is? The idea of races? Because see, if you buy into this concept of races, then automatically you're going to buy into these ingrained prejudices and biases and whatnot that come along with that. It's all absurd, but I'm trying to keep a straight face because this is important stuff. This is stuff that you need to understand. You need to understand where this stuff comes from. But thank God there are real scientists in the world. There are true scientists. We have a lot of fake scientists. We have a lot of people that are claiming to be scientists and they're not scientists at all. They're charlatans. A bunch of quacks calling themselves scientists. But there are some people who take science very seriously and who do research very seriously and who base their facts upon what they found out through scientific research, valid scientific research. So fairly recently, even the scientists, the true scientists that do true scientific research, even they admit that there's only one human family. They've been able to conclude this based on their unbiased, objective research. There's only one human family. And they classified that one human family as Homo sapiens sapiens. Even they admit that. That this idea of races is totally foolish. That there is no such thing as races of humans. We're one family. And in saying that, they find themselves actually in agreement with the Holy Scriptures, which we'll deal with a little later. So, in view of all this, what we have to do is we have to realize the fact of what race really is. Race, in fact, is a social construct. Let me repeat that. Race, the concept of race, is in fact a social construct. It has no biological reality, no biological facts surrounding it at all. It is totally social in its construct. There's no biological basis whatsoever for the concept of races. And that's why I said earlier it needs to be thrown in the trash can. That's where it belongs. It should not even exist in our minds. It should not exist in our thinking processes. It should not exist in how we relate to one another in our world. It should be thrown in the trash. differences which set the different groups of people apart are cultural and ethnic. It is cultural. We all have different groups of people all around the world living in different cultures, different cultural groups, and they have different cultural norms. Things that have been adopted and been considered as normal among the different groups. They have their own unique characteristics that have developed over thousands of years, ever since the Tower of Babel, which I'll deal with later. So they're cultural in nature, they're ethnic in nature. Familial, families. They have nothing to do with evolution. They have nothing to do with the concept of races. So why, you might ask yourself the question, why is the concept of race, given all that I just talked about, why is the concept of race embraced by the majority of people worldwide? Why would the majority of people worldwide embrace this concept of race? Since it's not biological, and since, in fact, it is an evolutionary lie. Well, for one thing, it's a convenient way, a very convenient way of placing people into different broad categories, which are frequently used to suppress the groups of people. If you can categorize somebody into an inferior group, an inferior race, so-called, then it will justify your suppression of them. And it will help to justify your abuse of them and keeping them in a certain category, because after all, they're inferior. They're inferior. They don't deserve to be regarded on the same level as us higher folk who have evolved beyond their race. Their race belongs down there, over there. And they should be kept over there and down there, because after all, that's the level of their evolution. That's where they belong. One of the most hideous, evil, ungodly, damnable examples of this was Adolf Hitler during pre-World War II and World War II, during that time frame. It's one of the most hideous, evil examples I can think of. I can choose others in history. Hitler, while Hitler was a terrible individual, don't you understand there were some folk that were even worse than him? Matter of fact, there was another fella who lived during his same time period. Joseph Stalin of the former Soviet Union made Hitler look like a choir boy. He was more evil than Hitler was. But that's another story. But dealing with Adolf Hitler, who claimed that the German people, who claimed that the German people at the very top of the evolutionary scheme. They were supposed to be Superman, tall, blonde, blue-eyed Superman. The funny thing about that is Adolf Hitler himself was not tall. He was not blue-eyed, blonde hair. He was not an example of one of these so-called Aryan supermen from this Aryan, superior Aryan race that he talked about. He was not even an example of that himself. But yet, he was able to deceive millions of German people and some other people to believe what he was saying. Even though he himself was not even an example of what he was talking about. But he used that false Aryan race claim. He used that to justify his forceful subjugation of an entire ethnic group of people, the Jews. Since the Aryans were a superior race, and since they were obviously evolved beyond the level of the Jews and beyond the level of the Gypsies and beyond the level of any other group that Adolf Hitler wanted to exterminate, he used that foolishness to subjugate the entire population of the Jews. And he tried to literally wipe them out. You hear me? He tried to exterminate the Jews from the earth. This is another reason this is satanic in nature. Because the Jews were God's chosen people. The children of Israel were God's chosen people. These were the people to whom belonged all the promises. These were the people to whom God himself swore. Okay? That they were going to be his people. So what does the devil try to do? The devil tries to literally exterminate them. He tries to wipe them out. He tries to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. Because of his hatred and anger, I'm talking about the devil now, against God, and because of his determination to annul the purpose of God in the earth, he tries to literally wipe out the Jewish people. Tries to wipe them out. He was responsible for the death of over 6 million Jews. It's just mind-boggling to even think about that number. 6 million Jews. And beside all the Jews he killed, there were a whole lot of them killed in Russia. There were a whole lot of them killed in Poland. It wasn't just in Germany. Millions and millions and millions of Jews were killed because of this evil of the concept of race. Are you getting what I'm saying yet? Are you catching on to what I'm talking about when I talk about races, the fallacy of it, where it came from, how evil the very concept is, how it's used? This concept, this satanic concept of race, the devil has used this concept. He's the one that developed it. He's the one that created it to divide us, to cause division, to cause confusion, to cause bias, to cause prejudice, to cause hatred among the different groups of people in the earth. He has used this concept of race to try and literally has used this concept of race. It is my conviction, for very good reasons, reasons I've just talked to you about. It's my conviction that no Christian, no true Spirit-filled child of God with the knowledge of God ought to even use the term race. We should take that term and throw it in the trash. In the trash heap of history. It has no place in the life of a true child of God. That's why when you see my post, those of you who follow me, those of you who have befriended me, when you read my posts, that's why you won't see me talking about race. You'll see me talking about ethnic issues. You'll see me talking about that. But you won't see me talking about races. You won't see me talking about racism. You won't see me talking about racists. I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it because none of those terms are even valid. Those terms are all satanic terms. That's where they come from. That's their origin. They're satanic in their very nature. And that's why you don't see me use them. Any child of God should not even use the term race. Rather just throw it out of our vocabulary. It shouldn't even exist in our vocabulary, the term race. Glory to God. The Holy Scriptures never use the term race. Never. In the entire canon of the Scriptures, you will not find the term race used. What you will find, the Holy Scriptures tell us, and I'm quoting Acts 17 verse 26, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitations. That's what the Scripture says when it comes to mankind. God doesn't acknowledge anything such as a race. We're all of one blood. One blood. All of mankind are descendants of Adam. All of us. Every single one of us are descendants of Adam. Without exception. Without exception. None of us evolved from anything. Adam was created by God. Eve was created by God from one of Adam's ribs. And all human people, all human beings came from that union, that original union. All human beings are derived from that human union that was created by God. Now, here's one thing you have to understand, and you should understand. It's very plain, very simple. When God created mankind, He programmed within man the ability to adapt to different environments. God put that within us, each one of us. We have the ability to adapt to different environments. For example, we have the ability to adapt to extreme heat. We have the ability to adapt to extreme cold. You'll find men living in the North Pole. You'll find men living on the equator in Africa and in other parts of the world where it is extremely hot. And you'll find people living in between. You'll find men living all over the world, literally all over the world. God has programmed the ability of mankind to live in all of the different climes of the world. God put that in us. And thank God he did, because if he didn't put that in us, a lot of us would have become extinct. We would have died. We wouldn't have been able to survive. But God put the ability for us to adapt to our different environments within us. And that's why you'll find us all over the world. There is a pigment. There's a pigment in our skins called melanin. And it's within each and every human being. It's called melanin. Melanin. And it is this melanin, this pigment in our skins, that determines what our various skin colors are. The melanin. There's not a human being on the face of the earth that does not have melanin in their bodies. And it's what determines how our skin color appears. And I'm going to make a very bold, provocative statement to you, but it's backed up by science. What I'm getting ready to say to you is backed up by science. It's a scientific fact. No one really has red, yellow, or black skin. Nobody. We all have the same basic skin color. We just have different shades of melanin in our skin. And because of these different quantities of melanin and types of melanin we have in our skin, that causes our skin to appear different colors, whether it be yellow, whether it be red, whether it be black, white, whatever it is. The melanin in our skin is what causes us to appear in different skin colors. And it's also a mechanism of pigment that helps protect us in hotter climates. And this is why typically you'll find that people that live in real hot climates usually have the darker skin. The darker skin, because what happens is the melanin reacts to the sunlight in those parts of the world, and it causes our skin to darken so that we will be protected from the harmful rays of the sun. And it causes us to appear darker in those particular areas of the world. Melanin even determines the color of our eyes. For those of you who don't know that, melanin determines whether our eyes are blue or brown or whatever the case may be. Melanin, the type of melanin, the amount of melanin in our eyes, and how the sunlight reflects off of our eyes causes our eyes to appear different colors, depending on the amount of melanin. So, God created mankind. God created us. We did not evolve. The theory of evolution is hogwash at best. It's foolishness, total foolishness. It's satanic in its very nature, and it's from that theory that the idea of races sprang. That's why that whole thing needs to be thrown in the trash. It needs to be thrown in the trash. And we don't even need to waste our time. As children of God, we shouldn't even waste our time talking about races. We should throw that mess away. We should eliminate it from our vocabulary. When God destroyed the world with a flood, he only saved 8 souls to repopulate the entire earth. Only 8 souls. But from those 8 souls came the entire population of the world. From those 8 souls. It was Noah and his wife, and Noah's 3 sons and their wives. And if you'll follow the lineage, and the scripture gives you the information, all you have to do is read the scripture. And you follow the lineage, you'll see where those different groups, those different descendants that came out of each one of those married relationships, how they spread out and they populated the world. And you can follow it down to this day, and those different peoples live in those different parts of the world. Before God dispersed, now something happened, and God ended up dispersing the people at a place called Shinar, and it was at the Tower of Babel, a tower that these people were building. Before he dispersed them, all the people spoke one language. They probably all looked alike. I would imagine all the people looked alike at that time. They spoke the same language, because they were all living in the same area. So it'd be reasonable to assume they all looked alike. They probably were similar in their skin color. They probably had similar eyes. They probably had, different things. I mean, they were all unique, of course. You could look at each one of them and tell the difference, just like you can today. Even within different ethnic groups, you can look at the ones. Some of them are among, let's say, for instance, among the black ethnic group, you'll have light-skinned black people, you have dark black people, you have medium black people. You have some black people look like they're white, because the amount of melanin in their skin is minimal, very minimal. They're very light-skinned. Okay, so you'll have that situation with them. So, but it would be reasonable to assume that all of them looked the same. All of them, we know they all spoke the same language. But God had told them, after the flood, God had told Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives to be fruitful, multiply, and to replenish the earth. So God didn't want them just hanging out in Shinar in one location. God didn't want them just hanging out there and doing what they wanted to do. God wanted them to repopulate the earth. And I'm going to read from the Holy Scriptures, word for word. I'm going to read what happened after the flood, what happened with these people. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So we see this is where man was scattered. This is where men and women were scattered. on all face of the earth. And because of the new languages that were brought about, because God confounded their language, so all of a sudden people that were speaking one language, now they were speaking different languages. They couldn't understand one another, so they had to disperse. The different families had to disperse. Ham took his wife and went one way. Shem took his wife and went another way. Japheth took his wife and went another way. And they dispersed. And their different descendants, through the generations, they kept dispersing and kept living in different areas of the world. Because of the new language and geographic barriers, the groups no longer would freely mix with the other groups, of course, because they were already dispersed. The result was a splitting of the gene pool. Different cultures formed. Different features became predominant within each culture. The characteristics of each culture became more and more prominent as new generations of children were born. Some of the people, no doubt, had developed different skin colors, different eye colors, and so on, because the characteristics of each group, through the various selection pressures, such as the environment I talked about, might be in a cold environment, some of them were living in a hot environment, whatever the case might be, because of these different environments they were living in. As I told you, God put the ability to adapt to these different environments within each one of us. And so they began to take on different characteristics, different skin colors, different eye colors, different eye shapes, what have you, the various languages and whatnot. And so people that lived on the continent of Africa, for example, generally, now there are some exceptions, but generally they developed a darker hue to their skin, a darker skin color, because of where they lived, because of their exposure to the sun. People that went to the Caucasus areas and whatnot, they developed a very light skin color. They were very light, fair skin colored. People that went to other areas and very cold climates, they developed other characteristics for survival. If they weren't able to adapt like that, they would have died a lot of times. Most of them would have died. But each one of those groups, each one of those cultures and those ethnic groups developed different characteristics. But that doesn't mean they were different races. There's no such thing as a race. They weren't races. They weren't on any evolutionary ladder or scale. And there were not inferior and superior people based on any such concept as a race. That's satanic foolishness. It's foolishness. It's a lie. It's a lie. It has no biological validity at all. None. It's a lie. There are no races. That concept of race and racism and racist, people who practice the so-called racism, all these things are based upon a lie. And all of them involve prejudices, biases, hatreds that should not even exist. And we as children of God should be fighting against that. We should be standing up and speaking the truth. We should be letting people know there are no races. Nobody is better than anybody else based upon skin color. Nobody. That's utter foolishness. There are people that practice all manner of biases and prejudices and whatnot. Yes, there are. Because of their stupidity and their ignorance and their satanic natures. There are a lot of people that do that. But there's no such thing as a race. There's no such thing as a race. You need to reject it. You need to throw it in the trash can. You need to take it out of your vocabulary. It doesn't even exist. It doesn't even exist. Except in the minds of the devil and in the minds of those who choose to follow the devil. That's where it exists. We should not be going around hating each other and despising each other and practicing violence against each other based on our skin color, but based on our histories and all this other foolishness. We should reject that. And all of us should realize that we're all, whether we like it or not, we're all in one family, one human family. We're all of one blood. And none of us are any better than anybody else based on any skin color or anything of that nature. None of us. I hope through this video that I have helped somebody. I hope through this video that I have enlarged your knowledge and your understanding where this issue of race is concerned. I hope I have slain the racial boogeyman with this video. Now I know many of you won't pay attention to a thing I've said. Many of you will not take a thing I've said and won't learn a thing. But I know there will be a remnant that will have listened. And it's that remnant that I'm trying to reach. It's that remnant that I'm trying to help. God bless you. God strengthen you. God give you knowledge, wisdom, and understanding about the truth. God bless you.